Sam Tatum was found flat on his back in a parking garage 3 blocks from the Glendale Galleria at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. Had it not started raining, he would have parked on the street and died in a puddle, his face wet with drizzle and his eyes staring up, unblinking, as rain flushed the life from them. The garage had been fate's one courtesy, saving him the embarrassment of dying even more publicly than he did, insofar as corpses can be embarrassed. It was an ignominious death. While he'd expected to die from one too many lines of cocaine up his old man's nose, or murdered even in a fit of pique by one of the hustlers he'd been too fond of for too many years. Ending his life on the concrete floor of a parking garage, his head in an oil stain, was too seedy even for Sam. Had he been able to think once he was dead, he would have found it a tawdry end to a tawdry life, and been glad it was over. The witnesses assumed it was cardiac arrest. The woman who found him walking with her 12-year-old daughter to their newly purchased Prius, parked 3 cars to the left of Sam's Camry, had worked as a nurse before marrying well, and was familiar enough with dead bodies to make the call. The poor guy was old, out of shape, uncommonly pale, and obviously lived an unhealthy life. He was lucky to make it this far, she thought, more disturbed that her child had seen a corpse than that he was actually dead. She didn't know him. What was it to her? Mostly it was an inconvenience, since she had the decency to call an ambulance, knowing it was much too late to save the poor slob and stay around to speak to the police. She'd considered making it an anonymous 911 call, since her daughter's ballet class started at 3:30 and this would mean missing it for sure. But something in her, that old nurse calling, that instinct to do the right thing, made her give her name and location and wait patiently for the paramedics who would try to resuscitate a man she knew was dead. His eyes were open, for God's sake, and what life had been in them had slipped away some time ago. Anyone could see that. She told her daughter Kelly to get into the car the moment she saw the man's feet come into view. Kelly, being a precocious, ballet class-taking 12-year-old, wanted the full view, and instead of doing what she was told, rushed around ahead of her mother to get a good look. She'd never seen a dead body before, and she could tell by her mother's lack of urgency that the guy was probably beyond help. After an inappropriate but predictable "cool," she obeyed her mother and skipped ahead to their car. Once inside, she tweeted that she and her mother had found a dead guy and waited for her friends' texts to start flooding in. Halloween weekend was the busiest of the year at Pride Lodge, with the 4th of July a close second. Gay people like a party, and the Halloween parties at the lodge had been legendary for 25 years. Rooms in the main lodge and the 6 adjoining cabins were sold out by midsummer, all in anticipation of a fiendishly good time in the Pennsylvania countryside, not quite like anything the guests would find elsewhere. It was city meets country in a unique and intimate setting, far from the streets of New York or Philadelphia. Everybody knew everybody here, and among the delights for guests was seeing friends they hadn't hugged or shared a drink with since last Halloween. Pride Lodge sits on 10 acres along Pennsylvania's Highway 32, just 20 minutes from New Hope and a short walk from the Delaware River. Originally an old farmhouse, the lodge had been converted into an inn in the early 1950s. Bed and breakfasts weren't all the rage then, and the idea of having an inn along a country road, surrounded by woods and farmland and catering to people who wanted something out of their way, was a novelty. So much of a novelty that the business failed, and the original owners, well-intended but bankrupt, sold it to new owners who sold it to newer owners. Finally, in the mid-1980s, the inn was dilapidated, its windows boarded up for longer than anyone could remember, and the last owner was selling the land. That was when Pucky Green and Stu Patterson, partners in life and whatever business venture they'd cooked up at the time, decided it was a perfect place for a gay resort. It proved to be the one stroke of genius and the one true success they ever had, aside from deciding to spend their lives together. They renovated the old inn and rechristened it Pride Lodge. They added on to the main 2-story building until it had 8 guest rooms on the first floor and 6 on the second, along with what they called the master suite, where the 2 of them lived. The lodge boasted a functioning restaurant and bar adjoining the main room, which everyone called the Great Room, complete with fireplace, widescreen television, 3 mahogany bookshelves to give the space a library feel, and a check-in desk where you could buy the usual rainbow paraphernalia, along with a Pride Lodge sweatshirt and baseball cap, should you be in the market for souvenirs. 3 years into the venture, when they realized it was going to succeed, they added a swimming pool, and 2 years after that they had 6 cabins built, each with 2 spacious luxury rooms that included kitchenettes and private baths. They had the inn's cavernous basement soundproofed and converted half into a piano bar called Clyde's and half into a karaoke room. The combined entertainment had the effect of bringing in locals for dinner and a night out, helping to swell the numbers without having to add more rooms. The whole undertaking took 5 years, but once it was completed, it was a sight to behold. A resort for gays, lesbians, bisexuals, and more than a few transgender visitors, well before the term had been officially coined. Back then, everyone just called it a gay resort, with the knowledge that all were welcome, including the occasional befuddled heterosexual couple who pulled into the driveway because they liked the name of the place. Most of them politely drove on once they got to the desk and realized there was something different going on here. Maybe it was the 2 slightly masculine women sitting by the fireplace, or the restaurant hostess with the Adam's apple. But now and then they stayed and were made to feel as much at home as any other guest. Kyle Callahan and Danny Durbin arrived at Pride Lodge late on Thursday night. This was their 5th Halloween at the lodge, and an event they both looked forward to starting several months before October. The couple had spent 3 long weekends each year there for the 5 years they'd been together, one for each season, excluding winter. As lovely as the Pennsylvania countryside was, Kyle and Danny both found it too bare, too cold, and too stark in the winter months. They'd found Pride Lodge by accident their first summer together, after Kyle suggested they go away for a weekend and began a brief internet search of gay bed and breakfasts within driving distance of their apartment in Manhattan. Pride Lodge popped up just 90 minutes by rental car. While it was much larger than a traditional B&B, it instantly became one of their favorite getaways, and 5 years later they'd made the drive again as October came to a close, and the Halloween festivities promised friendship, fun, and an escape for them both from the pressures of their lives in the city. Ricky was just about to go off desk duty when they arrived at nearly 11 o'clock that night. He knew all the regular guests well and was delighted to see them, even though he'd known they were coming. Several other guests had arrived early as well, and a few were having drinks by the fireplace, as Kyle and Danny checked in and got the key for Cabin 6. They always stayed in Cabin 6. For one thing, it was one of the luxury rooms with its own television, kitchenette, and bathroom. Guests who stayed in the main lodge had to share one of 4 bathrooms. It was also well away and just down the road, giving the roomers a greater sense of privacy. The cabins were surrounded by trees in back and a long private drive in front. Most of the people who stayed at Pride Lodge were older. It just wasn't the kind of place young LGBT travelers went for a good time. Too remote, too sedate, and too, well, old. The perfect hideaway for mature gay men and lesbian couples, and singles looking to be comfortable exposing their 40 or 50 or 60-year-old bodies in a bathing suit, or sitting around a restaurant bar chatting with other people who remembered music from the 1970s when it was new, and who would not likely be spending their time tweeting, linking up, or obsessively checking their smartphones for texts and celebrity news flashes. The other reason they always stayed in Cabin 6 was the painting.